I think Mary's significant impact was bringing the hall back from not really a state of collapse, but moving it into terrific new territory. Profitability, shows that we never had before.
Mary is incredibly knowledgeable in her field. She is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the hardest working individuals I have ever met.
Her biggest strength is her biggest weakness. She has a big heart. She drives us all hard because she drives herself hard.
Mary is like one of those persons who knows the business but gets the business done. Mary is just outstanding.
Mary Bensel was born on July 19, 1952 in Trenton, New Jersey. She's the older of two daughters born to William and Ruth Bensel.
I was at Mercer Hospital in Trenton, and I don't remember a thing about it. My mother tells me it was on the hottest day of the year.
Her father was a glassblower and created beautiful art pieces as well as utilitarian glassworks.
There's a bridge that goes between Trenton and Pennsylvania called Trenton Makes the World Takes, and he blew that sign. He also did all the signs for the Broadway show Hair and Mahogany, and so Dad would always be coming home with little tiny swans. He would bring my sister and I these little vases that he would make, and he was a great guy.
Her mother was a loving and hard-working woman, striving to provide opportunities for her daughters.
My mom worked her whole life to put my sister and I through school and college, and she was the kindest person. She was probably the best person I know. You know, she barely would have a drink at any time. Everything was for the kids and the family.
She and her sister Sally were opposites, which in their younger days brought about typical sibling issues.
She told me I was very mean to her when she was growing up, that because she was 3 years younger, I wouldn't let her play with my friends. We're totally opposite, but we sort of became each other's best friend as we got older. I trust my sister implicitly.
Mary attended Cadwalder Elementary in Trenton, New Jersey, where she enjoyed school and made good friends.
Miss Stolley was our first grade teacher, and she was fantastic. And I remember my first friend was Nikki Stroman, and we used to play out on the playground together.
She and her friends were fascinated by the movies and would regularly catch their favorite actors at the Strand Movie Theater, where admission was 25 cents.
And then we'd get an extra dime to get popcorn or whatever. And I had a love, even back when I was a little kid, of going to the theater and going to the movies. And I guess that's where it all started for me.
Mary loved to read. She would spend every free moment taking adventures through the books at her local library.
The librarian at our local library said that she felt by the time I was 7, I had read half the books in the library. And I would, you know, it was almost as though I would start at the beginning of the alphabet and work my way to the back. And books always took me to a magical place.
She also found magical moments at the beach, when her family would take her and her sister to the Jersey Shore.
A lot of my relatives had homes in Lavallette and Point Pleasant and different places, and I just became a water baby from the beginning. My mother tells me that I would be content as a baby to sit up on the top of the beach and eat a banana and just watch everybody swim all day. And then as I got older, they would say I was a fish because I could stay in the water all day.
The late 1950s and early 60s were exciting times. However, they were also times of high anxiety, as the nation was ever aware of a potential nuclear attack, then called the atomic bomb, from Russia. At school, students were prepared.
That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover, just as you do in your school. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck, of your face.
They would have the bomb drills, where you'd have to go out in the hallway and, cover your head and be against a wall. I don't think that would have saved any of us.
The 1960s ushered in a new decade of hope with the election of John F. Kennedy as the 35th President of the United States. He and his young family brought a sense of glamour and elegance to the White House, and the era became known as Camelot. However, the innocence of the nation would suddenly be lost when on November 22, 1963, the young president was assassinated in Dallas, Texas.
They called us all into the auditorium and they told us that President Kennedy had died. And I can just remember everybody crying and everybody was so shocked. And they let us go home from school that day, and I remember walking home, and the only thing I remember is my mother was ironing, and my mother was crying, and I was crying, and it really felt like a sort of death of innocence because while I was still very young, President Kennedy meant something to all of us.
When Mary was 13, the family moved to Morrisville, Pennsylvania, a small town 45 minutes outside of Philadelphia.
There was one street that didn't have a through street, so my parents' house had a lot right behind theirs, and they never did a through street, so it was sort of like a little park in the backyard. And I can remember when we were kids, we would build up this big a lot of snow onto a pile, and we would sled down to this park that was our backyard, and then the little creek would sometimes freeze over and we would ice skate. So we would go down sledding right and ice skate in our own backyard, which was kind of cool.
The music scene of the 60s was changing. The sounds of pop stars like Sinatra and Como were making way for the sudden British invasion, when a brash group of mop tops called the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show on February 9th, 1964.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles!
Like other young girls, Mary was awestruck.
I fell in love with the Beatles, and when they came on the Ed Sullivan Show, that was the best. I always played Jane Asher, Paul McCartney's girlfriend, and it was just a different time.
In junior high school and then high school, Mary discovered her own voice. She sang in the choir and soon discovered a passion for musicals and theater.
I tried out for all the musicals, and my best friend was the star of every musical. I would understudy all the roles of the high school musicals, so I know so many different parts. I was a soprano, and I ranked 7th in the state. My best friend, of course, ranked number 1 in the state. And so music and choir, church choir, meant a lot to me. I would do summer stock and How to Succeed in Business, and the theater was always part of my life.
Mary went to shows and listened to her favorite performers, especially Barbra Streisand.
I was going to be Barbra Streisand. I was the one in my living room singing into my brush the song from Funny Girl, I'm the Greatest Star. I could sing you any of the Funny Girl songs. And of course, I always laugh to this day and I say, I wanted to be Barbra Streisand, but the part was already filled, and it was filled with someone with great talent, and so of course, but I had my visions of being, that great singer on Broadway and in the movies.
Mary attended high school at Morrisville High. The school was small, which provided for a tight-knit community, but also had its downfalls.
Our football team always lost. We would play Bristol High School every Thanksgiving Day, and inevitably Morrisville, because they were so undermatched, because there were so few boys at the school, but we all knew each other.
She was a good student, excelling in English, but was not as strong in home economics.
I can remember taking a home ec class and laying the pattern down, and I literally cut the pattern and the rug. And so, how a girl is failing home ec, I don't know. I did much better in shop than in home ec.
Beyond music, the 1960s saw the race to the moon and the subsequent lunar landing on July 20th, 1969.
I'm going to step off the limb now. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
It was also a time of social upheaval. The civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, and student protests were prevalent. In high school, Mary was a part of the debate team. In one debate, the Vietnam War was the focus. Mary was given the pro side,
which of course was the opposite of how I felt. But on the other hand, it was easy to debate on the pro side when you were talking about the service that our military were doing.
Mary graduated from Morrisville High School in June of 1970. That fall, she entered Mansfield University, then Mansfield College, majoring in speech theater, and English.
Mansfield was one of the state colleges that had a great theater program, so that was the reason I chose Mansfield. They also had a fantastic music program in Mansfield, and I was the president of our theater fraternity up there.
While she was involved in acting at Mansfield, she also discovered a talent for marketing and was given an assistant position in marketing the theater. Mary also met a young man who would help her improve her stage design.
I was dating a guy at the time who was this brilliant set designer, and he was a brilliant costume designer, and he would build these little miniature sets. And before I started dating Tom, my scenery would fall down, by the time I was dating Tom, when I was a senior, my set designs looked like I had running water and elevators, and he was a big influence on helping me do better in the technical side of theater. And I loved performing, but even more than performing, I felt I had a real knack for directing.
She graduated from Mansfield in 1974 with a bachelor's in speech, theater, and English, along with a secondary education degree. She and her young set designer boyfriend were engaged, and they were heading to Yale, where he would attend graduate school.
Unfortunately, we broke up, and he was going to Yale Drama School for set design, and I was going to go with him, and I had also gotten my secondary education degree, so I was going to teach to help put him through school, and then I was going to go back to graduate school. Well, when we broke up, I was brokenhearted, and so I decided that I was going to go on to grad school. So it was a last-minute decision, so I looked around, and of the schools that I could afford to go to, the University of Pittsburgh seemed like a great choice.
The University of Pittsburgh was a cultural change for a small-town girl.
I remember my mother taking me up there, and she spent the night in my dorm room with me. I was so nervous, I never wanted my mother to leave. I wanted her to stay, and you'd think at that age you'd be fine, but I was always immediately homesick, and within 2 weeks I was in great shape. I was making friends and doing fine.
While in grad school, working on her acting and directing, she also had a job as an assistant in the marketing department, in charge of the box office, marketing, and PR. When NBC's Today Show produced a series of live presentations from cities throughout the U.S., Mary thought this would be a great promotional source for the university theater.
We were doing an original play called Steel City. So I was probably, 21, 22 years old, and I called the Today Show, because you have no fear then. I called the Today Show, and they accepted our show as the opening and closing of the Today Show when they did this whole piece on Pittsburgh. So we had our singers and our dancers, doing authentic pieces from the show. So, I started out right away on a high.
In grad school, she had an internship with a new theater called the Pittsburgh Public Theater.
Rational Equity Theater. And so I worked there and got 6 credits, and they then hired me for the summer for an internship. I remember I made $25 a week, and I was the assistant business manager. And I remember, one of the first plays we did was Twelfth Night, and Leonard Nimoy played Malvolio, and it was just such a great experience.
She graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 1976 with a master's in acting and directing. She immediately found a position with the Pittsburgh Ballet as audience development director.
I'd never worked for a ballet company, and it is so much different than a theater because, I was always taking care of photographs, and I would have a photographer with the ballet company, but it's not just a good picture. The ballet dancer's got to be their legs got to be in the right position, the turnout. And I was lucky enough to make best friends with our ballerina, Dagmar Kessler, and her husband, Frano Jelensik, was the ballet master. And so they taught me all sorts of things about ballet. And I just remember that as such a full time in my life.
From the ballet, she returned to small-town life, accepting a position with Stage West in Agawam, Massachusetts.
And I was the audience development director, and I wasn't there very long. And it was on a campus where every year they would have some fair, and I can still remember, we're rehearsing some show, and this whole band competition goes across the fairgrounds, but I was there a very short time. I had an apartment that was underground, and my windows, you would look up at people's feet. It wasn't, what I would call the best year of my life.
She would leave Massachusetts and head west to Tucson. accepting a position with the Arizona Theater Company.
The Arizona Theater Company did its main season in Tucson, but we also did a season in Phoenix. And so I had no air conditioning in my car, and I had to drive 2 hours on I-11, and I would take the spray bottle with me, and I would spray water. I knew every truck stop between Tucson and Phoenix, and just because I had to stop before I fainted to death. And I had a best friend, and we would go down to Mexico. And in those days, you know, we would go to Nogales, and you get 25-cent margaritas, and you'd shop and haggle.
In the early 1980s, Mary was called back east and accepted a position at the Walnut Street Theater in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The theater is said to be the oldest continuously operating theater in the English-speaking world and the oldest in the United States.
The Walnut Street Theater had been a Broadway roadhouse. It was a 1,000-seat theater. They were launching a new theater company, and so I was the press advisor. And then Bernard Havard, who is still there today, was starting a new theater company, and he asked me if I would be a general manager, which was a whole different kind of career for me. I hired the actors, I hired the directors, I negotiated the union contracts, the stagehands, the musicians, the directors' contracts, and I had somebody that worked for me as the company manager. And we would produce shows, and the Walnut Street Theater, our goal the first year was to get 5,000 subscribers, and our first year we got 15,000 subscribers. Today, they have over 50,000 subscribers, and we had a school, and I learned so much there because I had never negotiated anybody's contracts or done any of this work, and I really loved it.
After 5 years, she took a position at the Miriam Theater in Philadelphia. Formerly the Sam S. Schubert Theater, it is Philadelphia's most continuous location for touring Broadway show theater. The theater opened in 1918 with a road production of a musical from London and New York called Chu Chin Chow. In the early years, George Gershwin musicals and Al Jolson revues graced the Schubert stage. John Barrymore played Hamlet in the 1920s, and burlesque was featured in the 1930s.
We did all the big Broadway shows. I would go into New York, and I remember my boss at the time had done a lot of Broadway theater, and we went to the opening night of Peter Pan on Broadway with Kathy Rigby, and it was my first real experience in the commercial professional theater, and it was an exciting time.
Mary spent the next 10 years at the Miriam Theater and in 1996 accepted an offer as general manager of the Barbara B. Mann Performing Arts Hall in Fort Myers, Florida.
I came down to Fort Myers, and Barbara Mann was actually a live person. By the time I left, I think she was 95. She was a hoot. One of their interests in me was that they were bringing Phantom of the Opera to Fort Myers, and Fort Myers had never had shows on that level. And since I'd been a general manager in Philadelphia, they thought, well, this girl can handle it. And so we ended up doing 94% on 7 weeks of the Phantom of the Opera. And so we got to doing the bigger and bigger Broadway shows, and it was an exciting time.
In 2005, tragedy struck when her longtime partner, Jeffrey Martin, died suddenly. He was a theatrical designer, and the couple had traveled the world together, experiencing the down-under terrain of Australia, along with social events in the community. Now alone, Mary decided to move back north to be close to her family.
My sister's husband got ill and died. So it just seemed like the best transition to move closer back up towards my family. So I took a U-turn, and a friend of mine was running a company called Troika, and it was a Broadway producing company. And so they offered me the job of director of sales and touring for Troika. And Troika produced tours of Cats and Jesus Christ Superstar. And so for me, it was like the flip side of what I had been doing. I had been on the presenting end and the producing end, but suddenly now I'm working with the Broadway producers. I'm living out in Maryland, and I'm going back and forth to New York all the time on the train. And it was tough because I missed that not being in the theater every day.
In December of 2007, she accepted a position with the Wezel Performing Arts Hall in Sarasota. She thought it would be a stress-free opportunity.
Taking the Van Wezel job was one of the biggest challenges of my life. I got hired, and I was told by the then city manager that the city subsidized the hall, that I didn't have to bring in a profit, that it was not a problem, that the city would make up whatever deficit there was, and I could have the artistic freedom that I wanted to do to bring in different shows. So I was very excited about that. And I can remember I had my dog in the car with me, and it was a car that had Bluetooth, so I was talking to friends as I was driving down. I got this call from the city manager, and the economy had gone into the dump. And he said, well, we're doing something called challenge teams, and I'm going to make you the head of a challenge team, and your challenge is going to be to bring the Van Wezel to the point where it can support itself. And I swear I felt like turning that car right around with the dog and the stuff in my car and going home, because suddenly I'm going from this job where I could have artistic freedom and do what I want to do and not be challenged by, the economics, to suddenly I'm in charge of a challenge team, and I haven't even found out where the bathroom is at the theater yet.
And when she came in to the Bayfront and to Sarasota, the Van Wezel was a bit tarnished. It needed a lot of work. It was losing money. And in 9 significant years, Mary made that crown jewel. She polished the gem. She brought outstanding performances in, outstanding activity to the Bayfront, Friday Fest, Veterans Care, Children Education, etc. And she went from being in the red to the black. And more importantly, last year she brought the largest group of visitors, the #1 destination in all Sarasota County, to the Van Wezel. So that crown jewel is shining now.
As the executive director of the Van Wezel Performing Arts Center, Mary really knows her business from Broadway to the blues, from comedy to country. She's an expert in the entertainment field, and she's a great facilities manager. But Mary is a superstar in her own right. She has run the Van Wezel in the black, which is unheard of in municipal performing arts facilities and performing arts facilities in general. She's fun, she's friendly, she's the face of the Van Wezel, but she's dedicated and she's daring.
She has used her experience to bring in better attractions. She certainly has brought in better shows. The week-long appearance of Les Mis, the Jersey Boys, now the Book of Mormon, those were all brought in through her connections, her understanding and her appreciating the nature of the material she's presenting.
Mary creates a very high energy sense of fulfillment with her staff at the Van Wezel Hall. She has done a fabulous job just creating collaboration with all the staff members, and as a result, the programming and just the overall quality of the shows have just been raised to a whole new level with Mary.
Mary is surrounded by a staff that is loyal, to be the word, dedicated to extend themselves beyond the need sometimes, but it's all a part of her program for making Van Wezel the very best that Van Wezel can be.
Perhaps one of the most remarkable things that Mary did during her first few years here in Sarasota was save the education program at the Van Wezel Performing Arts Hall through the cooperation and the financial assistance of the foundation.
Has the whole range of activities and programs for school-age kids that run in addition to the regular evening Van Wezel performances. And she's really in charge of getting those attractions in there as well.
She's tireless. She is always on the go. She's always moving around the community. She actually moves around the country as well to check out the latest acts. She's dealing with agents and performers and patrons and her fellow employees at the city. I have never seen her anything but upbeat and friendly. She markets the Van Wezel tirelessly. She's conscientious. She pays attention to every detail of that facility. And it's one of the reasons the Van Wezel has been named the #1 performing arts center of centers that size for the last 3 or 4 years by Venue magazine.
When I had gotten here, the city subsidy was projected to be $1.8 million. And I got here 3 or 4 months into the fiscal year. And by the time the year ended, I'd gotten it down to $1.2 million. So I'd made a pretty good stride. And the next year, I still had somebody else's booking season. And we got it down probably at that point to maybe $500,000. And I'm really proud to say last year, which was the end of my 8th year, we had a surplus of $1.3 million. So it was almost a $3 million turnaround.
Under Mary's leadership, the Van Wezel has booked big-name stars for the gala and anniversary shows, including Dolly Parton, Rick Springfield, Ringo Starr, Diana Ross, Tommy Tune, Tony Bennett, Jay Leno, and many, many more.
Last year, we won the award for being the #1 tourist attraction in Sarasota in high season, which had never been done by an individual theater before. You know, it's usually St. Armand's Circle or places that tourists go. And I realized it's because one minute you can have a comedy, the next night it's a Broadway show, the next night, you know, it's a pop star or it's a rock band. And so we appeal to a wide variety of people. It's not just one thing. It's not just the orchestra, it's not just ballet. We have it all here at the Van Wezel.
While Mary has remained single throughout her life, she embraces her niece and nephew as her children.
They're Chad and Jamie, and they're 24 now, and they were twins, and I can still remember the day they were born.
Mary is also passionate about travel. She has spent time with family and friends in China, Greece, and Eastern Europe. She has ridden elephants in Africa and dined in Paris. For Mary, it is more than simply pleasure.
I think you become a better person or more open-minded if you travel the world. And the first time I went to a third world country, it really became clear to me what is happening. And so if I'm not working, you know, I try to travel.
And of course, her story would be remiss without mention of her companion, Tinkerbell.
Tinkerbell is a 7-pound Yorkie who hates every dog or animal known to mankind. It doesn't matter whether it's the dinosaur on the television or the Great Dane we walk by. I could have so many more friends if Tinkerbell wouldn't attack every dog she sees, and she goes insane. And then when she gets home, she's the sweetest little girl sitting on my lap. Of course, that is if I don't get in the way of her and food, you know, because she's a diva.
We asked Mary Bensel her advice for those who follow.
Never give up and never lose hope, because there's a way around every problem, and you can live that dream. My dream was to be an actress, and you know what? I wasn't talented enough. So I went around a little bit. I took a little bit of a left turn or a right turn, and I became very successful in management. At least I hope I'm successful in management. So if your dream is to be an actress but it doesn't quite work, or if your dream is to be an architect, maybe you can be a construction foreman. Don't lose the dream.